Hello, my name's Mark, I'm 36 and I'm a recovering gambling addict. Now, I'm not a teacher, counsellor or a therapist. I'm someone who lived through a gambling addiction for 13 years and went to hell and back and took my friends and family with me. I was brought up off a single mum in Bolton. My dad left home when I was about 4 years old. Now, in all honesty, I didn't really miss my dad because I got a lot of love and attention off my mum and the rest of my family, and I had lots of friends and I was a happy child. Now, I started progressing at one thing, and it wasn't at school. As a young lad, I started progressing at football. By the age of about 9, I was playing for my local amateur team. By 11, I progressed even more and I was playing for Bolton Wanderers. By 13, I was playing for Man City. I also played for the town team in the county, and I captained a number of them sides. Everything was going well for me as a young lad. I was happy, I was loved, I had lots of friends and family. Now, the reason I tell you that was because there was no warning signs of addiction for me from a young age. Gambling wasn't really in my life. My dad wasn't around at that point, and I was happy and I was loved. I had no brothers or sisters, so I was really close to my mum. There was just me and her in the household, and like I said, I was happy and content. At the age of 15, I had a major life event happen, and I found out I was going to be a dad whilst I was still at school. Now, I remember finding out that news, walking on a local park and literally crying for 2 hours with my head in my hands. I went home to my mum that day and she asked, was everything okay? And I lied to her. I said, yeah, I was completely fine and I'd had a good day at school. However, I was hiding what was really going on. Now, me pretending that I was okay was something that I went on to do for the next 13 years, and I almost became good at it. It was at this age I really developed a dysfunctional way of dealing with stress. Around this time, I was also reintroduced to my real dad. My dad had been living in London for a number of years. He returned home and asked me to meet him, and I went and met him in a local pub. And I remember him giving me £20 and told him that was my betting money. Now, at that point, I'd never gambled. I wasn't aware of gambling. Like I said, I wasn't around it. And I remember being quite confused to what he was giving me this money for. However, that day I went and picked some horses in the bookies. I remember going back to the pub each time, and sometimes I'd won and my dad would be patting me on the back, and I felt like it was something I was good at. I think I walked in the bookies that day with about £20 and walked out with around £800, which for me as a 15-year-old lad was absolutely massive. I had a job at that time that paid £20 on a Saturday morning. I had a job raking leaves for £10. So to have £800 for me was like months and months of my salary. And it was that quick fix. I also know how it made me feel, the adrenaline rush similar to football. I remember seeing all the lights in the bookies and being absolutely fascinated. And the one thing that I wanted to do was go back the week after and do it again. Around that time, my football was starting to suffer at Man City. I wasn't really taking it serious. Now, I don't think I was good enough to make it as a professional footballer. However, when I got released at the age of 16, that routine and structure that I'd had from being a young lad had completely been replaced with gambling. So every Saturday I would go and meet my dad at the pub and pick some horses, run over to the bookies picking horses out, and started gambling every single week. On leaving school, I got a job as an apprentice electrician, which I'd started doing well at. However, every Friday I would get my wages and run to the bookies, and couldn't wait to pick some horses and some dogs and football bets. And I started to bet on several different markets then. It wasn't just a roulette machine. By the age of 17, I'd say I was a full-blown gambling addict, and it was becoming a problem. And why it became a problem, I'd started to get consequences. So I'd be loaning money off friends and family members. I'd not pay my mum a keep, and cracks started to appear. So I describe myself in the beginning of this story as being close to my mum. This was the first time I really started to fall out with people around me and people that I loved. And that's something that I didn't intend to do. I never meant to hurt anybody. However, that's what it had started to do. By the age of 21, things had took a really dark turn for me, because I'd gone from every person loaning money. I'd gone to banks, to overdrafts, to payday loans. And when that run out, I started to go to the wrong types of people, the likes of loan sharks. Now, when you don't pay a loan shark some money back, it's a little bit different to not paying a bank back. On one occasion, I owed a group of people £1,000. They came and looked for me, found me, and run up behind me and hit me over the head with an hammer. I remember waking up in the back of a taxi on the way to Bolton Hospital, wondering what had just happened. Now, you might just think at this point, why didn't you stop gambling if this was happening? In all honesty, I didn't think I had an addiction. I thought I had a financial problem. I thought if someone came along and gave me a huge amount of money, my problems would be fixed. But I remember around this time, my debts being paid 10 times over, and I always went back to gambling. The warning signs were there early on. I could never collect my winnings. I was always chasing my losses. I was getting in financial difficulty, and my mental health had really started to affect it. But I still didn't class myself as having a real big problem then. I was always chasing that one big win. That big win came over 10 times around. I won money around this time, and I continued to win money for the next 7 years of my gambling, but I never stopped. And that was a big warning sign. I could never feel like I stopped. So after that attack, my family found out about it, and they pushed me to get some help and told me to go to Gamblers Anonymous. I remember going to my first meeting and looking around and almost comparing myself to everybody else in the room. And I looked at one bloke and thought, you know, he's lost his house, his family. I'm not at that point. I've not lost my career. I'm still doing okay. I still get up every day and go to work. Therefore, I've not got a problem. So the week after, I didn't go back to Gamblers Anonymous, and I didn't really take it seriously. I went into that half-heartedly. I remember a couple of weeks later telling my mum that I'd gone to that meeting, her finding out that I'd not gone to it and being in floods of tears, which I didn't really feel like a big deal, and I thought everything would be okay. And therefore, I carried on. Despite this, I've managed to progress in my career, and at this point, I was in the middle of my degree. I was a QS on a building site, so I had quite an important job. I was going to work every day in a shirt and tie, and things from the outside seemed to be going well. If someone would have looked in from outside and seen me, they would have seen me in my company car in a shirt and tie and thought I had it all going on. However, I was having suicidal thoughts by the age of about 23. My mental health was on the floor, and I was gambling every single day. By the age of about 24, I owed one group of people £10,000 who were quite serious people and were making quite serious threats to my family. On one Friday, I got home from work and someone had been round my mum's house looking for me, and she was in floods of tears, and she begged me to leave the country and get out of the way. And I remember being in total shock and thinking, you know, what do you mean by me leaving the country? I can't leave my job, I can't leave my 2 children. And she said, you're not being a good dad, you're not being a good son, you're not going to qualify and pass your degree. You're managing to ruin your life, and now you're putting not only your life in danger, but your family's life in danger. And I remember thinking, you know, what am I going to do? And my mum got a laptop out and she said, you know, we'll find somewhere for you to go. So literally that Friday, I went to work as a QS in a shirt and tie. And on the Monday, I woke up in the Channel Islands, which is a long way from where I live, and starting a new life. And I remember turning up on that island with my bag over my shoulder and pictures of my children in there and thinking, you know, I've got to start again. But I thought I'd be okay on the island because there was no bookies and I couldn't get in trouble there. However, that couldn't have been further from the truth. Within about 2 weeks, I'd set an online betting account up. I'd managed to get a job in a kitchen. Every time I got my wage, I was gambling it on the account. And I'd also started to play cards down there, cards being something that I'd never done before, but it was just any way that I could find to gamble. And at that point, I would have gambled on anything. And I often thought, you know, if I get this one big win, I'll be able to move back home, pay my debts off, and everything would be fine. So for the next 12 months, I chased that win. However, I got even more difficulty, and my mental health was on the floor. I'd stopped paying my rent down there as well, so I was getting even in more trouble. And after about 12 months, I decided I was going to ring my dad, because if I found out that he was over in Ireland working with some other family members of mine over there, and I went over and started again and ran away from SARC with even more unpaid debts. When I arrived in Ireland, I was happy to see that my cousin was there, Aaron, who was 21 at the time. So I'd missed my family, I'd missed them for the last 2 years. So I was delighted to see Aaron was there. And for the next 4 weeks, we hit the town in Dublin and went on a few nights out. And I was just really glad to be around my family again. Now, after about 4 weeks of being there, Aaron went home to Bolton for the weekend. Aaron at the time had just passed his PE degree. He was going to be a PE teacher, and he was working with my dad at the time over in Ireland just for a bit of extra money until he got a job as a PE teacher. Now, when he returned home to Bolton that weekend, he had a fallout with his girlfriend, and he took his own life, which was a massive shock. And I remember finding out and being in total shock. My auntie and uncles were in absolute pieces over it, and it was devastating for our family. I remember being in total shock and having to go home and carry his coffin. And I remember around that time my gambling just went even more worse. I remember, gambling was something for me that was an escape from every emotion. So every time I was stressed, if I was gambling, I was forgetting about it. But more often than not, the gambling would make it all worse. And that's what it just did. After Aaron's funeral, I decided I was going to go back to Dublin and hide away again because people were still looking for me in Bolton. And I stayed over in Dublin for the next 12 months. Again, whilst I was there, I got a good job. I was getting up for work every single day. I had quite a well-paid job as well, going to work every day in a shirt and tie. I had my own office, and people would have thought, I had everything going together. However, I would gamble my wage every Friday when I got it, which was quite a high salary. And by 7 o'clock at night on that Friday, I had no money left. And at the time, I was living with someone who was a labourer on a building site who was on much less money than me. However, he was paying for all the bills, buying the shopping, which was, it wasn't fair on that lad. But that's what gambling was doing to me. My dad was finding out even more so what I was doing and was getting really upset with me. But my dad was probably the worst person to be around at that time because he was gambling more or less every single day. So after about 2 years of literally being on the run, I decided I was going to go back to Bolton and try and face these people that I owed money to. On the way back to Bolton, I was also speaking to a girl who I knew previously, and I ended up being in a relationship with her, and I got back to Bolton. And I remember one of the first things she asked me, I'd got a problem, or she'd heard that I got a gambling problem, and I played it down because there was no way that I was going to tell somebody or a girl that I was in a relationship with that I had a gambling problem. I wanted to think that I had it all going on, that I was quite successful, that I'd had a good job whilst I was in Ireland. There was no way I was going to tell her I was a full-blown gambling addict who was regularly having suicidal thoughts. And therefore I reinvented myself once again. Despite all this going on, I managed to get a good job for a construction company, and I worked my way up to a managerial level. Again, going to work every day, I'd show up on time, and all my work colleagues would have seen me laughing, joking and smiling and still doing quite well at my job. And I don't know how I managed to do that, but I had a lot of resilience at this point. But around this time, this is when my gambling really spiraled out of control, just because I was trying to pay this £10,000 off that I still owed from before I left. And for the next 3 years, I was literally chasing my losses, loaning money off so many different people and getting in all sorts of mess. It was around this time I'd say I become a bit of a con man, or a full-blown con man if I'm totally honest. I was going to people with business propositions, asking them to invest in things that didn't really exist. I was selling fresh air if I'm totally honest. I never had one product or thing that I was selling. I just became a really good liar. Around this time, my girlfriend didn't even know I was gambling. She just seen warning signs of erratic behaviour. There'd be often times where she'd think I was going out with her on a Friday for a meal and I'd cause an argument so I didn't have to go out because I gambled all the money. And I just felt like I was spinning so many plates around this time, and my life was completely falling apart. The people that I were going to were becoming more and more serious as well. So I was loaning money off not only normal people and businessmen, but people who were quite dangerous. At the age of 29, I actually got kidnapped off a group of people because I owed them money. They bundled me into the back of a car, they asked for my phone off me, and they rang my mum and my dad. My mum was at work at the time, and thankfully my mum and dad rang the police, and the police put a tracker on my phone, and I was rescued that day. But when I was in the back of that car, I was thinking, how have I got here? I always thought of myself as being a good lad, a popular lad, having lots of friends and family, And here I was at the age of 29, completely broken, owing all sorts of people money and in quite a lot of trouble. Thankfully, the police rescued me that day, and I might not have been sat here today if they'd not rescued me. But at that time, my mental health was completely on the floor. It was at this time my family said, enough's enough. They didn't want me in their life anymore. And they said, they didn't want to speak to me anymore. And that was a turning point for me where I felt like I'd lost everyone. My girlfriend at the time broke up with me. I lost all my family. And because I was putting them in serious danger, I wasn't being a good dad, a good son. I was failing at my career. And I was having regular suicidal thoughts. And I honestly thought, how am I going to get out of all this trouble? I owe that many people money. I can't stop gambling. I've tried a number of times and failed miserably. There is no way out. And I used to get home from work and literally go on the internet and look at ways of taking my own life. And I'm so glad that I, gritted my teeth and admitted that I got a serious problem, that I felt like I needed professional help. So at the age of 29, after losing my family, my friends keeping me at arm's length and feeling like I was on the floor, that is the first time that I reached out and took it serious and asked for help. And help for me was going to rehab. And I remember turning up, not knowing what to expect and thinking, these people will never, help me. I'll never be able to stop. And, not really believing that I would ever stop. I think I was just there for a bit of a break. However, what I did decide was I was going to be open-minded and I was going to give it 100%. And one of the first things they did when I got to rehab, they asked me to write my debts down. And when I wrote my debts down, it was 24 different groups or gangs of people, and it was at £306,000. Now, for me, I was in total shock by that. I didn't know what I owed because I'd lived this crazy manic life. And I remember thinking, how am I going to pay that back? However, the first thing they did tell me was, focus on your addiction this time around. Park the money for now, and we'll get to that. But you really need help for your addiction and your mental health that you've been going through and suffering with. And I stayed in rehab for about 9 months in total. And that's where I managed to turn my life around. I was open-minded, I gave it 100%. There was still bumps in the road. I learned a lot about myself in recovery. Some of it was really difficult. There were times where I felt like running off and going back to my old life. But I'm so glad that I didn't. Recovery for me now doesn't mean my life's perfect. I still go through stressful life events. But thankfully, since I entered into recovery 7 years ago, I've not gambled since. And this is from someone who gambled for 13 years every week, more or less every single day throughout that time. So I'm now happy, content, gamble free. I've managed to get my family back. I've managed to turn my life around. I spoke at the Houses of Parliament. I've set a company up called Wise Up that I go up and down the country and share my story. And I absolutely love my job. But what I do now is, I do daily positive action, and I really look after myself, and I really work hard to stay in recovery. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it's possible. And I hope my story can inspire someone, no matter where you are on your gambling journey. And I'm not saying my problem's worse than anybody else's. The fact is, if it's affecting your relationships, if it's affecting your career, if it's affecting your mental health, your finances, then it really is time to address it and hit that stop button. I wish I'd hit that stop button much, much sooner. There were warning signs from me from the age of 17, 21, 23, where I could have hit that stop button, and I never did. Thankfully, at the age of 29, that's when I hit that stop button, and I'm now, I'm happy. I'm happy with my family. I'm in a relationship with someone I love. I don't cause arguments with that girl. I'm really close to my mum again, really close to the rest of my family. And I'm a good dad, and I could have never have said that when I was gambling. I could have never have said I was a good dad. So thankfully, I have turned it round, and I'm very, very happy.